Hello and welcome to Sorry About the Late Review. Sorry about that. I'm Mickey Alexa. For those who usually watch my movie reviews, this is going to be the new format going forward, not only for films, but for books and comics and TV shows and video games and who knows what else. For those new to the channel, thanks for joining us. In honor of the relaunch, we're doing a 3-for-1 special. 2019's Godzilla, King of the Monsters, 2016's Shin Godzilla, and 1998's Godzilla Takes Manhattan. And I'll explain to you why I think that particular film may have killed the golden age of The Simpsons. Godzilla King of the Monsters is the third film in Legendary Pictures' MonsterVerse, which began with 2014's Godzilla reboot starring Aaron Taylor Johnson, Elizabeth Olsen, Bryan Cranston, and Ken Watanabe, and continued with Kong Skull Island in 2017. A short but enjoyable cinematic universe that so far has raked in a collective $1.3 billion. Released in North America on May 31st, 2019, King of the Monsters wasn't exactly a failure at the box office, making over $370 million on a budget of $200 million. The problem is, though, it was the lowest earner of that series by about $200 million. While it does seem like the announced and referred to sequel Godzilla vs. Kong will probably see release, unless it really exceeds expectations, it's likely to be the last in this series. And that is a shame because this is a very fun movie, and exactly what Western blockbuster Godzilla should be like. It is an effectively pulled off big sequence monster film that serves much better and clearer to see scenes for what we paid for, or considering the box office that has been, didn't pay for. It has reverence and respect for the decades of Godzilla canon and lore that came before, with one really fantastic and explosive nod to 1954's original Gojira. The human characters are acceptably cartoonish and melodramatic, as is befitting a kaiju film where their existence more or less ceases to matter come the third act and Godzilla rumbles with King Ghidorah, kicked off by just a really fun scene involving Ken Watanabe's character, which is a reference to the original Gojira, giving Godzilla a pat on the snout nearby an ancient exposed nuclear reactor in Atlantis. Sorry for the spoiler. It was too insane not to mention. Human characters in Godzilla films have always been cartoonish, with previous Toho productions reaching far weirder grounds than eco-terrorist preteens or anyone portrayed by Charles Dance. Plus, while ridiculous, they all offer far more interesting characters than any of the mains from 2014's Godzilla, not counting Bryan Cranston. I mean, come on, how can you not enjoy that level of surface-level seriousness overlaying a big fluffy cake of goddamn ridiculousness? The soundtrack only adds to this terrific veneer of gravitas, composed by Bear McCreary, shifting from well-set cinematic atmosphere to over-the-top brazen and bellowing ethereal themes that manage to squeeze into that sweet spot between boringly over-serious and downright cheesy. Even when things do momentarily get serious, such as during a major and frankly disappointing character death, the scene is touching rather than accidentally laughable, which at least means that it was competently done, even if it shouldn't have been done in the first place. Overall, you'll probably enjoy this movie on some level, either as layered yet corny opera or a monster punch-up, and it will be well worth the watch when it eventually gets dumped onto a streaming service. (2016's) Shin Godzilla, or Godzilla Resurgence, is Toho Pictures' third reboot of their flagship character, cultural ambassador, and legal citizen of Japan. Unlike the general silliness and farce of classic Toho kaiju films, Shin is a scathing and brilliant political satire of the government's reaction to the 2011 Tohoku earthquake, tsunami, and resulting Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. Presuming an audience familiarity with presented political characters, costume choices, and systemic behaviors, the film tears through the plot, jump-cutting from short moment to moment in the middle of an ongoing disaster, just long enough to highlight a story development or ridiculous character reaction before completely upending the set board and changing the rules of the game. This is a reflection of the different nature of this Godzilla to previous incarnations. Whereas the original Gojira was based on the trauma and fears of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, using imagery familiar to Japanese audiences who had lived through the Allied firebombings during the war just 9 years prior, Shin is a more drawn-out and evolving crisis, presented first as a potential seismic event, followed by a destructive wave, leading to the development of a radioactive nightmare, one that for a good portion of the film literally just looms there in the middle of the city, ominously doing nothing but building to an inevitable destructive resurgence. This film won the Japanese Film of the Year, and while a dramatic departure from traditional Godzilla, sometimes in very unexpected ways that look, at least to a Western audience, downright laughable, potentially undercutting the menace the fully formed Godzilla represents. Godzilla with googly eyes is something I never expected to see, but here we are. This is a really minor nitpick though. This film is incredible. It is hilarious, it is exhausting in the best possible way, and it deserves all the praise it gets. I would suggest in this instance seeing the dubbed version only because the scenes cut so quickly. You'll sometimes find the screen showing sublines from like 3 scenes before, desperately trying to keep up with the film and potentially disrupting your enjoyment. And so here we are, like an ominous threat fulfilled, at 1998's Godzilla by Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin. What can I do to 1998's Godzilla by Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin that 1998, Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin didn't already do to it? The casting was terrible, save for Jean Reno. The dialogue was repetitive, trite, and cliché-ridden. The entire film was plagued by a roving swarm of does not make sense, popping up during crucial moments to make excuses for the flimsy writing, and most of the effects have aged like a diaper on a tip. I'm sorry if that seems harsh, but this film is terrible. Just god-awful. When I was 12 and saw it in theaters, I loved it. It was 1998, and that kind of stupid was riding high at the time. There are aspects I don't mind. Nothing I can say I enjoy, but some aren't outright terrible. The design of Godzilla, though drastically different and by no right should be called Godzilla, was a nice twist on the then overused raptor look that Jurassic Park introduced and then beat to a fine pulp. Every moment that Jean Reno is on screen is bearable to decent, which is no slight to Mr. Reno. He's carrying the entire 100-store monstrosity on his back, and the sequence from the trailer with the old man fishing off the pier, which I presume was the first scene that they ever came up with when they got the option for this film, is by itself a much better monster movie than the rest of the film that surrounds it. Something that came to light online during the release of King of Monsters was how popular and well-loved the Saturday morning cartoon adaptation of this version of Godzilla was, providing the thin characters and the Zilla concept room to breathe on their own, with a format closer to the Toho originals. While that show was cancelled after only 1 season, I have a theory that this movie may have helped tank the legacy of a show that remains on the air to this date. 2 recurring characters, the cameraman and news anchor that the film spends far too much time following, are played by Simpsons talents Harry Shearer and Hank Azaria. While this was far from their first appearances in public or on film, this was their first on-screen performance together, bantering back and forth in familiar animated voices that seemingly broke the spell the Simpsons had held America under for a decade. This was, after all, only 8 months after the broadcast of 2nd episode of the 9th season, The Principal and the Pauper, the episode that Simpsons fans, for the most part, agree was the moment the golden age of the show died. Godzilla would debut just 3 days after the 9th season finale, leaving the viewing public to stew with the fish-smelling carcass of a film until late August saw new episodes of The Simpsons hit screens, at which point most agree the magic was gone. Godzilla 1998. So bad it killed that thing you used to love about The Simpsons.